Climate change is an issue that's been on the boil in the last couple of weeks following a visit from climate change sceptic Lord Christopher Monckton. Lord Monckton gave his views on this station on Friday. In the interests of balance, University of Otago Sciences pro-vice-chancellor Professor Keith Hunter is here with the other side of the story. Good evening, Professor Hunter.
Good evening, Rebecca.
Now, carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has reached 391 parts per million. It's a lot higher than it was in pre-industrial times. Tell us about the data.
Sure. It's probably better to put it in a context. Carbon dioxide is, although 391 parts per million doesn't sound like much, it's actually one of the most important control knobs for the Earth's climate in the long term. So if you go back into the geological past, the Earth's been cooling down for the last 100 million years at least because carbon dioxide is sucked out of the atmosphere by reaction with rocks, with minerals. So the question is, when was it last at 391? And that is the middle of the Pliocene, which is about 3 million years ago. So from that time, it's taken 3 million years to get where we were in pre-industrial times, and we've now reversed that in probably only a century.
So what do you think the data means as far as climate change goes?
Well, you can, for example, say, well, what was the climate like in the Pliocene? It was 2 to 3 degrees warmer, and sea level was 25 metres higher. So that's a bit alarming. The real question is how much climate change, how much warming are you going to get for a given input of CO2? And we've known about this for more than 100 years because back in the 19th century, the Nobel Prize-winning chemist Svante Arrhenius made the first estimates, and he said it was going to be about 2 to 5 degrees Celsius warming for doubling of CO2. Now, there have been many estimates made in the last 100 years using things that Arrhenius didn't have, like computers and more sophisticated techniques, and the answer keeps coming out the same. There are a very small number of people who think it's a lot lower than that, and I think that says more about psychology than it does about climate science.
What are scientists saying about ocean acidification?
Well, on one level, ocean acidification is very simple. CO2 is an acidic gas, and the oceans are moderately alkaline, and that means they contain bases. So about a third of all the CO2 we release by burning fossil fuels is going into the ocean, and of course the fact that the ocean's alkaline means that CO2 is reacting immediately and bringing about chemical changes.
What does the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change say about global warming?
Well, that's a huge question. There have been 4 reports published so far. But if you look at the summary for policymakers, which is kind of the dumbed-down version for governments and so on, what you see is a thread of increasing certainty about the causes of climate change and the consequences, so that they use rather couch terms like very likely or extremely likely. Those of us in the science think that the IPCC summaries are rather conservative because they are a result of a consensus between scientists and bureaucrats. So by many measures, the deterioration in the climate system has been worse than predicted by IPCC.
In more general terms, what would you say to someone who's wondering about climate change?
Well, if your car breaks down, you go to a mechanic. If your teeth hurt, you go to a dentist. If you want to know how your cell phone works, you would talk to a communications engineer. So in all cases, you go to the people who know what they're talking about, who have been trained. So if you want to know about climate science or climate change, you talk to a climate scientist who's been trained and is researching the subject.
University of Otago Sciences Pro-Vice-Chancellor Professor Keith Hunter, thanks very much for your time and your views on the matter.
Thank you.
After the break on 39 Dunedin News, we take a look at what's on the cards for Youth Week and we'll check out weather for Tuesday.